Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I am happy to be here with you today, and we're going to be having our usual program. Now, if it's the first time you've ever been to the show, we do long-form political commentary here, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we reach out to you to hear what you have to say on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, DLive, all the social media that the internet overlords will allow, to hear your comments, your free speech, your expression on what's going on in the world and in our nation. And we want to hear from you. You can also reach us at 607-242-1582 to call into the program and to let your voice be heard about any of the issues that are affecting our nation, our community, the international community. Now, with that said, and that introduction, we do want to go on and say hello. I know that the internet right now is acting up. It's not our system. We just cleaned our entire system just before coming on to the show. So it's the internet overlords messing with this again. I think they're upset because we were recently called a ist and a phobe, and we are still on air. And it would seem some people don't like that. In fact, we were called an ist and a phobe, but it wasn't because of our coverage of Elissa M. Bolt. If you have not seen that, please do take a look. This was an exclusive interview with a candidate for the New York 22nd District, her first appearance in the Southern Tier of New York, and we do advise you to take a look at that. It was an interesting interview with Elissa, and I think it went well, other than a minor technical issue. And we do recommend people check that out to know what's going on in the nation. We'll also mention that the reason why we were called an ist and a phobe has nothing to do with Elissa Bolt and the interview we had with her. And for those who are unaware, she is transgendered, and she does advocate for the gendered movement. But no, it was actually, in fact, because of, well, I don't know if you can see it, but it's the ongoing action we have with the New York State Commissioner of Education in regards to the school board election, because like you, regular citizens can influence who is on the ballot of any election, and you get to decide the people who teach our children and also represent us in the various forms of government. And this has gone now, we're now going to the New York State level to try and protect our children in an election. And because of that, because we dared oppose the far left, we have now been labeled as an ist and a phobe. Well, it's not stopping us. We're continuing to go forward. In fact, we're going to be talking today about what's going on in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of 2021, something that is brewing into a much larger conflict. In fact, this may be the largest conflict in the last 73 years for Israel. This is similar to the 50-day war, some are stating, based on the number of individuals that are being affected. And we're going to ask you what you think about this and how U.S. policy, Middle East policy, has been affecting this, and what will be the ramifications to the United States, to the rest of the world, to the Middle East. What's going to happen because of what's happening in Israel right now? Before we get to that, and it seems the internet overlords are allowing us back on now. But before we get to that, we did want to mention there are a couple of other things that are of note and interest. You may have heard, Twitter is going to be a paid subscription. You are going to have to pay to have Twitter. We first found out about this early in the morning, this morning, May 16th, and it was being reported by Clownfish TV. We usually watch the program because of their entertainment value and some of the topics that they cover, but they first brought our attention to the idea that there is a thing called Twitter Blue. Now, CNET also covered this. Twitter Blue is going to charge you $3 a month, depending on the tier that you are involved with, which means that there's several levels to this. The cheapest being $3 perhaps, and the most expensive is unknown. And this will, of course, give you priority on being seen in Twitter, who can see it, what can be done, removing tweets. But the bigger question is, for all those people who were screaming about the fact that private companies, that Twitter and the other internet overlords are free to do whatever they want. No one can complain. You shouldn't be arguing about that. When it came to the question about free speech, we were told, well, you know what? Twitter can censor anyone they want to. They can remove anyone they want to. And Twitter did. And Twitter has lost hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of subscribers, of individuals using its service. And because it did that, because it whittled down the conservatives in using Twitter, the individuals most likely to buy products off of the advertising on Twitter, Twitter shot themselves in the foot. Their product is worth less because the advertisers know that the progressives are less likely to use any of their services, to buy any of the things that are on the ads on Twitter. And therefore, Twitter said, well, we have to get money somehow. And so they're deciding they're going to go with the subscription model. And we've heard from the progressives, as was being reported by Clownfish as of last night, the far left, the progressives who use Twitter and dominate it and are actually preferred by the Twitter hierarchy, they're the very same people who are saying, oh, no, you can't do this. It's kind of funny, I think, that the very same people who said Twitter can do anything it wants as long as it is attacking conservative thought, as long as it is attacking conservatives and censoring them and removing them, deplatforming them, when that same company that those very same far-left individuals said it can do anything it wants, well, it wants to force you to have a subscription to use it. And now they're saying, oh, you can't do that. You can't take away our free service. We are entitled to free stuff. And Twitter's saying, no, you're not. And I do want to thank Jason for being here on the show and speaking up. You too can leave your comments on Facebook, Twitter, DLive, on all social media. And he mentions that that I should get a level blue account. Well, I don't know. But it is like a members only event. But sadly, the members are now going to have to pay on Twitter. And it makes you wonder, because we've seen many of the memes for many years circling around saying Facebook is looking to go to a subscription model, that many of the social media platforms that originally didn't have a membership basis, a subscription model, are going to go to that. Let me ask you, would you pay to use social media? If you had to pay to be on Facebook, if you had to pay to be on Twitter, would you? Is that something that you would do? Because it's no longer going to be free. Jason mentions the stock did pop when they suggested it. Of course, because they're going to have revenue and actually be judged like a regular business. They would be the same as HBO or Disney. You know, you'd be able to see how many people are there. And it would be quite interesting, I think, from a conservative and Republican point of view, to see how dedicated are the far left. What happens every time that Twitter wants to do a purge of conservatives and Republicans? How is that going to affect their stock price? How is that going to affect their revenue stream? It'll be interesting. Can Twitter survive only off of the far left? Are the far left willing to pay for it? And this is a message being sent out to Facebook. Don't think that Facebook isn't looking at this and going, well, if Twitter can make money, why can't we? Why can't we force people to subscribe and to pay for the service on Facebook besides all the advertising? Especially since we know that there is a change coming from Google where the tracking data will no longer be given to companies like Facebook, like Twitter. They will no longer have your tracking information. And that means they can't direct ads at you, which means they have even less money that will be coming from their advertising, and they need other revenue, which means they're going to come for your pocket. And so it will be one more subscription service that you will have, like Hulu, and then you'll need Hulu, and you'll need Disney Plus, and you'll need the whole host, 50 others? And it's interesting because the majority of these are trying to tell you, well, you have to be progressive to be on this channel, that you have to be on these subscription services, because Disney Plus is very much a progressive company with a progressive ideology. We've seen so many of these companies get woke, and now they're saying, well, now you have to pay for that wokeness. And I have to wonder, what happens when people don't pay for the wokeness? Besides the people who think that wokeness should be free, what about the other people, like the conservatives and Republicans out there, who say, I don't want to pay for being woke because I don't want to be a progressive. I don't want to be a socialist. I don't want to be a communist. What about those people? Can these companies survive just on the far left, who are not known for their contributions? They're not a very, according to polling and data that's been studied, most of the people who do the generosity, the giving, the donations in this nation come from the right. So it will be interesting to see. Of course, that is not the main focus of the show today, but I did want to address that because I think it's interesting, and I do want to see your comments. Besides Jason, everyone else is invited, whether you agree or disagree, to make your statement known, to have your voice heard. Because if you think Twitter, and I'm sure immediately afterwards, the rest of social media going to a subscription basis, if you think that's a good idea, please, I want to hear about that. If you think that the the right will pay for this to be assaulted by the far left, I want to hear your discussion on that. I really do. But let's move forward. And there was something else that I wanted to address very quickly, something you may not have seen. It came out today in the news, and that is Space Force. Yes, everyone laughed at the name when it was suggested by President Trump, and people have laughed about the concept, but it is a reality. The United States does have a military force dedicated to the outer limits of space and beyond, the outer limits of our atmosphere and beyond. And a commander for Space Force had made a book that's just come out. And they were speaking about the book. Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer had spoken about his book, which is The Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmasking of American Military, when he went on to the Steve Gruber podcast. And in that podcast, he made the following statement. Since taking command as a commander about 10 months ago, I saw what I consider fundamentally incompatible and competing narratives of what America was, is, and should be. That wasn't just prolific in social media or throughout the country during this past year, but it was spreading throughout the United States military. And I had recognized those narratives as being Marxist in nature. Well, that statement being made by Lieutenant Colonel Lohmeyer has resulted in him being removed from the military. He is no longer part of the military, no longer a lieutenant colonel. And a lot of people are asking questions about this. Was this justified? Is this okay? Can you remove someone from the military for expressing an opinion? Well, to be clear, there is a regulation that an individual representing the military, if they're in uniform, they cannot express a political opinion. If you are using your title as part of the military, you cannot. It is expressly forbidden by the Unified Code of Military Justice to be able to express a political ideology. The question is, did the lieutenant actually express an ideology, or is he reporting and telling people about what he's seeing, an actual fact? It's an interesting question. Mavis is answering, I'm not paying for leftists to bully me whenever I get my opinion on another post. I lived without Facebook before and I can do it again. Probably be better off without Facebook, by the way. Well, that may be true for those of us who are a little bit older, like I predate the internet entirely. So to say that I can live my life without the internet, absolutely. I lived before there were cell phones. It's possible. But now we're talking about a generation, maybe even 2 generations of children who have grown up with nothing but social media. They've never known a world without Facebook, without Twitter and the other social media giants. And their lives, their interactions are based all around social media contact. I mean, have you tried to take away a cell phone from a 20-something and ask them to actually sit down and have conversations with other people? I mean, they literally will have conversations while out with their friends, with those friends, on social media, even as they sit right next to each other. So imagine that those very same individuals who have always used this now are going to be saying they have to pay for it. That's going to be interesting to see how they're going to suddenly deal with the reality they have to pay for the services that they want. But I agree with you, Mavis. Many of us have lived without it. Many of us will live without it. But going back to what's going on with Lieutenant Colonel Lohmeyer, let me ask you, is what he said a statement that was political in nature, or is it revealing a truth about our military that perhaps our military does not want revealed? If it's true that within our Space Force, the newest division of our military, which has taken many individuals from other parts of our military, in particular the Air Force, if there is a growing movement of Marxists there, of democratic socialists, of communists in our military, what does that mean for America's safety as our national defense? When we have to say, well, our military is actually protecting us from countries like China, like North Korea, like the Soviet Union, well, the former Soviet Union, Russia, countries that have a much more hardline, much more socialistic and communist viewpoint. If the thing that's stopping those countries from trying to take action against the United States, and I'm not talking about hacking, but actually trying to invade or otherwise impede on the United States' existence, if that's based on our military, and our military is becoming part of their government system, how safe will America be? How safe will the American allies be? Let me ask you that. Have people considered that? If our military is being infiltrated because of the indoctrination of socialism and socialist ideals, and more of our members in our military are socialists, what happens to our allies around the world when they have to deal with socialist nations? Think about Japan, South Korea. Think about Indonesia. Think about in Europe. Think about all the pre-Baltic and the European Union nations, Great Britain, Germany, France, Poland, especially Poland. Imagine what they're going to say when they rely on the power of the United States military, when they rely on the ability of the United States government to back them up as they try and hold back the communist hordes from Russia and China. And now they can no longer trust that the American military will actually act in their best interest. How does that change the geopolitical landscape? Because the geopolitical landscape is changing. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm having my challenge with the New York State Commissioner of Education, because our children are being indoctrinated into the critical race theory, the progressive socialist ideology that promotes the Marxist ideal of individuals as categories, not as human beings, not as individuals. They are being programmed to accept as a reality that socialism is good and that they should be preferring that. And they're going into our military with that idea. And so when they have to face off against nations, that also espouse that idea. How safe can we actually be? How safe can our allies actually be? And I know we have a lot of people who watch this program from Great Britain, from Canada, from Germany, France, Peru, amongst other nations, India, amongst other nations. They're on the front lines. I mean, China and Russia, they're on the same continents as many of these countries. Some of them have borders with these nations. And so they will be the first ones to have to deal with this. And they rely heavily. How many bases does America have in Germany, in Poland? How many bases are being supported by the United States government, both financially and through our military service, men and women? It's an interesting question. And it's a question that our news media are not addressing. They do not tackle this. They do not want to tackle this. You've never heard the news media talk about how socialism is involved in our military and how this is affecting it. How teaching our children about the indoctrination of critical race theory and teaching them about gender identity politics and teaching them about being democratic socialists, how that has an impact going forward for decades. This is a big deal. And I'm sure China is very happy to hear that there is a growing socialist movement in our military. No longer looking at, say, the freedom of speech. That's not, if our military isn't there to help defend that, then what replaces it? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What replaces our freedoms when our military isn't there to help defend those freedoms? And when the only person left defending our freedoms, like our free speech, is you and me. You and me, especially on social media, that we will now be forced to pay for our voices to be heard. And now we're at the limitations of how much can you afford to let your voice be heard. Can you imagine how much George Soros can afford to spread his idea of socialism around the world? A billionaire. Think of Mike Bloomberg, a billionaire who can afford to throw away $500 million for a 2-month presidential campaign. If he can do that, how much money can he throw towards Twitter, Facebook, social media on a subscription basis to promote an ideology that says that you can't have salt, you can't decide what food you eat, that he gets to decide what food you have, that he gets to decide what freedoms you have, and that he can drown you out simply because he's willing to pay a little bit more money than you are on social media that you use? Isn't that a chilling idea? Doesn't that terrify people? I don't know. It terrifies me. Jason mentions military and police have been argued as being socialist. I don't believe, as a former member of the Marine Corps, former active serviceman, I do not believe the Marine Corps is socialist at all. People may want to argue that, and based on my experience of other veterans in the Army and Navy, I would tell you that they're not socialist organizations either, and that predominantly they have traditionally been more conservative. Now, I was in service 30 years ago, and I've talked to people who were in service 10 years ago. What's happening right now in our military, as we see the growth of critical race theory, as we see the growth of the democratic socialists, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are inspiring people like Alyssa Bolt and many, many others to go and become involved in our military and our politics, I don't know. I don't know where our future lies. But I do have a question on, are we going to be able to maintain the freedoms that we have today for the very next generation? especially as their ability to speak is going to become more and more limited because they just don't have the financial wherewithal to do it. And they're going to be told more and more what to think, just as they are being told right now in our schools, as per our school boards, our local school board elections that are being infiltrated by socialist members of BLM, Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, Citizen Action, and other far left organizations that want to teach our kids to be racist, to hate someone based on the color of their skin, to evaluate and judge people based on the color of their skin and the occupation they may hold. I think that's a chilling prospect. But to be more direct in reference to Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer, I do have to say, he did cross the line. He did engage in political speech while representing the United States government. And that, while you are an active member of the military, is expressly forbidden by the UCMJ. And therefore, he should be punished. And so the punishment is correct. I can't question that. I don't question that he should have mentioned this, that this should be told to the American people. But at the same time, having been someone who served in the military and is familiar with the UCMJ, yeah, he broke the rules. He needs to pay the consequences of that. Something we have to remember, you can break the law. If you want to break the law, be prepared to pay the consequence of that. If you think that going out and having a protest and blocking a street, blocking a roadway, if you think that's what you need to do, be prepared because you should be arrested. There's no question about that. You need to be arrested. You may say, well, I'm protesting. Fantastic. You're also endangering people's lives. It is expressly forbidden to go into a highway and block off traffic out of the blue. No, that's a crime. You need to be arrested for that. If you, like certain members of Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow in my region, go to a city like Rochester and you decide that you want to attack people while they're eating dinner, individuals that are going about their lives, if you want to oppress those individuals, you want to harass those individuals, you want to essentially riot, well, then you deserve to be arrested for rioting. You don't get to say, well, I was just protesting. I'm sorry, that's not a protest. You are inflicting your views on others. You are oppressing and intimidating others to force them to accept something that they wouldn't normally do. That is a crime. And there are several crimes there. And we've seen members of Progressive Leaders Tomorrow in my region and around the nation have been arrested for that. Now, the other thing we need to see happen is that the DAs actually prosecute those charges, that individuals who have broken the law need to be held accountable to the full extent of the law. Just like people in January 6th, they broke the law. They need to be accountable to the law. Well, so do the people who are doing the autonomous zones in George Floyd Square, the same ones who are doing it in Portland and Seattle, who've attempted it in Austin and Atlanta. Those are against the law. And if you want to see the people from January 6th who be held accountable to the law, you must at the same time say, well, the people who are at George Floyd Square, who are in the autonomous zones around this nation, have to be held accountable to the law as well. They are holding American citizens hostage. They are violating a host of rules and laws and regulations of the local, state, and federal level, and they need to be held accountable too, in just the same exact manner, because they've done, if not the same, worse. Now, you may disagree with me. You say, Mike, well, that sounds really great, but I don't think that's the case. Well, please explain to me what the difference is between the autonomous zone that's in George Floyd Square right now in Minneapolis. What's the difference of the autonomous zones that exist in Seattle that have been attempted in Austin, in Dallas, in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, in New York City, in Brooklyn. Please tell me how those are not as bad as any other event, any other protest that's going on in this nation, how they have not violated laws. Please explain that. Because I know the media isn't covering it. People don't realize that Portland has been in over 100 days of riots. It's one of the largest amounts of riots I've ever heard of in my life. I believe it may be a record of continuous rioting. News media doesn't want to tell you about that. Excuse me. There are riots that are going on in Seattle and Portland right now. There are riots that are going on around this nation right now. You're not being told about. There are autonomous zones that have been attempted and exist right now. You're not being told about it. The moment the George Floyd trial ended, the media stopped telling you that there is an autonomous zone in Minneapolis right now, that American citizens are being held against their will for a year, that they are hostages for a year, and the news media doesn't want to tell you about it. And you have to wonder, why? Why do they not want to tell you that American citizens are being held hostage, that our cities are being destroyed, that protests are violent? Violent protests are happening every day around this nation, and you aren't being told about that because it seems the news media wants it to happen. And that brings us back to the same question of what's happening. Because of this ingrained socialism that we're seeing, that is taking on violent actions, that is promoting and supporting and advocating for violence. Because when you create an autonomous zone, when you create violent protests, this is violence. And we're seeing that being taught to our children and entering into our military. And I have to wonder why our allies aren't saying, what is going on in that nation? Are we safe? I know China's saying, hooray, and they're supporting this. But what about everyone else? Again, you may disagree. You may say, Mike, well, I don't agree with that. You may not be able to see this live. You may be watching this and trying to catch up because the internet overlords are suppressing this. They are throttling this, making it difficult for you to watch this live and say, gee, what's happening here? Because they don't want you to know. And I'm interested in finding out, what do you think about it? Because now that I'm telling you and I'm providing you the evidence that has existed in some cases for an entire year, what are you going to do now? What do you have to say about that? Let your voice be heard. Just as you've seen Jason and Mavis do, you too can do that. And you can call in to 607-242-1582 to agree or disagree with it. But if we say nothing, one thing is guaranteed: it will continue and it will grow. Jason mentions our allies have never done as much as us to keep the world safe. Well, they did fight in World War I. They did fight in World War II. I will say that. And they have engaged in activities to try and stop both with trade and other economics, to limit nations like North Korea, to limit Iran, to try and stop the aggression of China and Russia from time to time. Is that the same as what America has done? No. America leads, but we are the major nation in the world. We lead, and the other nations tend to follow. That's usually the case when we have a strong leader in the United States. But I would tell you that we don't have a strong leader in the United States at this moment. I'll tell you that the person who's running America right now, or is the guy with the big title, the big seat, Joe Biden, is weak. And his weakness is destroying not only the United States, but other countries around the world, that he is the leading factor on the increase in violence that we've seen around the world and the problems here in the United States as well. That he is one of the main sources and reasons why we're seeing so much violence in the Middle East right now. That's a big statement. Let me back it up for you. So you may have noticed that recently Joe Biden said, and this was on May 13th, the rule is now simple. Get vaccinated or wear a mask until you do. The choice is yours. That's a false choice. That's a false argument. Because the choice isn't simply do what Joe Biden wants. The choice is be an individual and do what you want. You have the right to say, I will or will not be vaccinated. And that's a big deal. Now, I do want to answer your question in 1 second, your statement there, Jason, on Hamas in just one moment. But I want you to understand, when we hear from Joe Biden and the White House that you only have two options, and both of those options are what they are demanding, that you must act in a certain way, that you have no other right than to do what the government is saying, which is to wear a mask or to be vaccinated. You don't have another choice, according to Joe Biden. That's authoritarian. That is an authoritarian, tyrannical statement. And it's untrue. You have a right not to be vaccinated. You have a right to not wear a mask. You have rights. And they do not come from the White House. They do not come from the Democratic Party. They do not come from Democratic socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad. You have rights, period. And they come from birth. They are birthright. And that is the foundation of the United States, and that separates the United States from every other country in the world. You have a birthright to free speech. You have a birthright to be able to defend yourself. You have the birthright that you control the government, and all rights belong to you until we allow the government to create a law and take some of those rights away from us. These are facts. It is not a question. It is not disputable. It is not something that is a guess. It is an absolute fact. As stated in our Declaration of Independence, as stated in our Constitution, these are inherent facts, and it separates the United States from every other country in the world. And when someone like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they say you don't have a choice, you must do what the government says, that all of your options are contained in what the government has told you must happen, that's when you have a tyrannical government, and that means the United States has become weaker. Because if you don't have freedom and you don't have choices other than the ones that the government provides to you, then America is not as strong as it had been. And that's my opinion there. You may disagree. To come back to what Jason had mentioned most recently, Hamas would not be attacking if Trump was president. And the answer to that is, you're right. They would not. And we know this for a fact because Hamas had restrained themselves while President Trump was in office. The Middle East was becoming more peaceful. There were let's say it again, 4 Middle East peace deals under President Trump. Unforeseen. No one has ever done that before. Lots of people have tried, and they're lucky to get one peace deal if they've ever gotten that, and very few presidents have ever even gotten that far. But President Trump had 4. In fact, that's why he was nominated for 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. Actually, 3 Nobel Peace Prizes. Because of the amount of peace they introduced into the world. And within a little more than 110 days, Joe Biden has reversed that, and the Middle East is now more active, more violent, and more closer to war, all-out war, than we've seen in the last 5 years. In fact, this brings us back to a level not seen since the Obama administration. This should terrify us. And seeing that Joe Biden, is leading the charge on trying to remove the rights and freedoms and the will of individual American citizens means America is becoming weaker and weaker and more like other nations around the world. And those nations cannot defend themselves against Iran and China and the Soviet Union and North Korea. And I know my friends in Germany and in the United Kingdom, in Canada, in other parts of the world, Peru, I know that they're going to say, well, Mike, that's kind of mean to say that we can't defend ourselves against the incursion of socialism and these violent individuals like Iran who use terror around the world to force people to believe something that they don't agree with, to accept these kind of crazy ideas, these dictatorial, authoritarian ideas, that these countries are not able to do this efficiently without us. And the answer, and I have to tell my friends, is the proof is in the pudding. It's true. Without the leadership of the United States as a beacon of democracy in the world, yeah, most other nations are falling to this socialist, this aggressive, violent momentum of socialism. And we see that. Look at France. Look at the suicide bombings in France. Look at the protests and the violent protests that sometimes shut down the entire nation of France from time to time. Look at the violent protests and the attacks on citizens in Germany, in the Scandinavian nations. Look at England, which has imported the entire Black Lives Matters movement from the United States into England, which is causing massive disruption in the British Parliament. Without America, yeah, it does get harder. Now, that doesn't mean that these are not independent nations, that these nations can't do things for themselves. They do. Absolutely. But without the positive influence and the significant financial and military backing of the United States, it gets a lot harder. And when the United States is failing in its message, in its example of democracy, of freedom, of free will, of the power of that the government is controlled by the people, not political factions, not ideologues, not people like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, but when the United States is run by the people, we are at our strongest. And when we have presidents who recognize that and exemplify that, then we are at our strongest. Think about how the world back down, the number of wars and the magnitude of the wars around the world decreased other than presidents like Ronald Reagan. They increased under presidents like Bill Clinton and also Barack Obama. We had increases in moral violence. Under Joe Biden, in 110 days, we have seen a complete reversal. Our allies are under attack. We are seeing increased violence. We are seeing Iran go out and create more violence. And if you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm not understanding that, if you're catching this as the internet overlords are delaying it and slowing it down, but if you see this and say, well, Mike, you just don't understand, please, I'm more than happy to hear you explain how I got it wrong. I really, really want to hear that. Because it's not just that I'm saying that Joe Biden is weak, that he has failed the United States. You know who's also saying it? Democrats. Like Representative Schiff, Representative Adam Schiff, one of the lead proponents against President Trump, who put out all kinds of lies. We're still waiting for his evidence proving that there was a connection of Russian collusion that he said over and over again for a year, promised the American people there was actual evidence. And here we are 3 years later, we still have yet to see any evidence that he has had. He has yet to provide the American people, either privately or as a member of Congress, he has yet to provide us with one shred of proof. And that man, who is absolutely not on the conservative or Republican viewpoint. He is completely on the spectrum of socialism and the progressive ideology. And Adam Schiff is saying that the Biden administration is a failure, that they are failing the American people. The Biden administration needs to push harder to stop violence in the Middle East. He is admitting that the Biden administration has failed our allies. It is failing the American people, that the Biden administration is weak. I mean, if you disagree with me, please try to tell me how he is telling the Biden administration to push harder to try to stop the violence in the Middle East. Tell me how that is not an indication of weakness. A weakness that was recognized by the Soviet Union, that has been recognized by China, that has been recognized by North Korea, that has been recognized by Iran. We have seen all the major enemies of the United States, all the major enemies of democracy and freedom in the world being attacked under Joe Biden, whereas for the last 4 years, they didn't say a word. They held their tongues. They did not act to attack democracy and freedom and the allies of the United States or the United States. They knew better because we had a strong leader. And now we don't. Quite simply, Joe Biden is a pushover. And in many ways, he's worse than President Obama, who was also an apologist. And that says something. President Obama ran around the world apologizing for America's greatness, for America being a leader of the world, both in innovation, in technology, in economy, in military, in democracy. And he apologized to the world for that. And he is stronger than Joe Biden. That is arguably the truth, that you can argue that that apologist, Barack Obama, was a stronger leader with his constant red lines in the sand being drawn with Syria and never actually doing anything, never actually having the backbone to actually stand up for what he believed in, is a stronger leader than what we see coming out of Joe Biden. I know that's a powerful statement, and I can prove it. Besides just what we see coming out of Adam Schiff, and besides the fact that we are seeing right now, and this is coming from Annie Ngo, where Antifa is running around with their anti-Israel rhetoric, the left and the socialists are there enjoying the fact and reveling under the fact that Joe Biden is weak. And this is something we've been talking about since, actually, this was January 22nd, the second day of the Biden administration, when we first mentioned to you that Joe Biden had taken actions to make the Middle East more violent, to make the Middle East more at unrest, to promote what we're seeing today. We told you about it on January 22nd when we told you that Joe Biden started to move troops into Syria and that he was increasing the number of troops and he was increasing the amount of aggression in the Middle East by the United States. And that this was the start of the dominoes that would lead to greater violence and greater conflict. And here we are today on May 16th. And we're seeing that actually happen. Less than 5 months later, less than 120 days later, the violence that we warned you about, that we saw was being initiated and started immediately by the Biden administration. He did this on his first day in office. On January 21st, he started moving troops around and started to pick fights in the Middle East, destabilizing the Middle East even more than it already was. And that has resulted in the violence we see right now. And I see Jason mentions Obama apologies were more of a declaration of hatred of America. They were. They were a hatred of America, but that is also a weakness of America. And even with that, I believe that it's stronger than what we're seeing out of Joe Biden. Dow Grimm, hey Dow, good to see you. And I know Mavis is still there with us. Dow says, yeah, he remembers that discussion. Yeah, when I was talking about what's happening in the Middle East and how that was going to have an impact in our immediate future. The rest of the news media denied that. I want you to go back. Look at the news on January 22nd. The rest of the major news media, the CNNs, the MSNBCs of the world, ABC, CBS, they denied that the United States government was moving troops into Syria. They denied that the United States was taking a more aggressive stance and destabilizing the Middle East. We were the only ones us and I believe it was, and the Israelis were the only ones who were willing to tell the world, hang on, the Middle East policy has now changed. The peace talks that were going on have stopped. And instead, we're seeing a United States that is trying to be an aggressor out of weakness, which is one of the craziest things I've ever seen. The United States right now under Joe Biden is trying to demand people act in a way they want and are weak. Oh, and Dow mentions that the Epoch Times reported it on that day as well. I may have missed that, okay? And I want to give them credit. If Epoch Times mentioned it, it's a very small group of individuals who are actually trying to tell the American people what's going on in this world. And I guarantee you, if you're looking at just MSNBC, if you're looking at just CNN, groups that have lied to the American people and been caught lying to the American people for the absolute purpose of promoting socialism and gender identity politics and critical race theory, we've seen them admit over and over again that they lied to the American people. Over and over again. The Ukraine call, the whole Ukraine Trump concept, a hoax. Didn't happen. No proof. No one, it never happened. They've admitted that. It took them 4 months to do so, but they've admitted it. They admit that Joe Biden's son, the Hunter laptop, exists, that it is, in fact, filled with evidence showing that China is influencing the Biden administration through his son by tens of millions of dollars, and that Russia has done the same thing through the mayor of Moscow giving $3 million to Hunter. They have now admitted that. It took them 4 months to admit it, but they have now come around and said, well, it's actually a fact. Actually, it took them 2 months to admit it right after the election. And these are things that are adding up to the weakness of the United States, of how weak the Biden administration is. Mavis mentions, I'm still here, just doing some spring cleaning while I listen. So far, no lag, which is good. I'm glad to hear that. So this is a problem, that we are seeing this weakness, and we're seeing the sources of this weakness is coming from China, the communists of China, and the Russia. Individuals like Vladimir Putin and those he controls. And where our first sign of that was when we, on January 22nd, when we were reporting about the increase in troops in Syria and the change to our policy. And we know that there was a big change because even in December of 2020, as we reported on February 28th, as we saw more and more conflict brewing in the Middle East, we could reflect back and know there was a massive difference. Because in December of 2020, while President Trump was still in charge, we did see that there was an attempt by Iran with trying to make attacks against the United States. And President Trump's response was to send out two B-52H bombers and a guided nuclear missile submarine, saying back down, that the United States was not weak, that we would defend ourselves against global terror. And Iran and the other bad actors in the Middle East saw that and calmed down. They backed off. because we had a strong leader and they remained calm. And almost immediately, as soon as Joe Biden got into the Middle East, as soon as he was there on January 22nd, we started seeing everything destabilize. We started seeing that there was an increase in global terror. We saw that there was an increase in attacks against Israel, our ally, and the only democracy in the Middle East. And we saw that the United States was being attacked, hacking our pipeline, shutting down our infrastructure. And if you want a description of something that exemplifies how weak the Biden administration is and how defenseless the United States is right now, it's not just that our infrastructure was hacked. It's that we didn't fix it after the fact. The Biden administration did not stop the attack on the Colonial Pipeline. It's that the Colonial Pipeline paid a ransom of $5 million. That's what stopped the hacking. That's what stopped our infrastructure being attacked. The Biden administration had nothing to do with it. The Biden administration was too weak to stop the hack and too weak to do anything about the hack. No wonder we see China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and why they are acting up. If we are so weak that we can't stop, and I'm not going to, even if we couldn't stop the hack, that we couldn't react to the hack, that the only thing that we could do was to pay the ransom for our infrastructure, national security, right then and there. That's our national security. It's our infrastructure. And if it was that dangerous, that is an act that requires our government to be in the forefront doing something. Under strong presidents, not only would we have done something, we would have made those other countries, and we believe the hacks came from Russia, we would have made them do something to those hackers because our natural interest was at risk, and we would have made Russia very aware that allowing this to happen from their country would negatively impact their country. But instead, what we have is Joe Biden, who is contending with the fact that Vladimir Putin is laughing at him as he struggles to walk up a set of stairs, who is challenging Joe Biden to have an international debate so that he can embarrass him. That we are listening to China come to summit meetings and use an international platform to embarrass the United States, to scold the United States as if we were some child and not the world power that we are. That means we are weak. And that means that all of the various negative influences around the world, we're talking about the terrorist organizations like Hamas, like the Iranian Red Guard, that these individuals, they are going to, the Iranian Republican Guard, the IRCG, that these terrorist organizations are seeing this weakness and they are saying it's no holds barred, time to move forward and to become more of a danger to the world and to increase the amount of conflict in the world. Now and I see that Jason mentions that Biden is worse than Carter. And to an extent, you could even make that argument. And again, Carter was a weak president. And that's why we needed a strong president. That's why we got Ronald Reagan. Kind of like when we had Obama, who was a weak president, not as weak as Carter, but in that realm, especially when it comes to conflict in the Middle East, he was weak. And we needed someone strong, and we got Trump. And that had an impact on the world, as it always does. Now, you may say, oh, well, President Obama had a lot of drone strikes, drone bombings. That's not the same thing. And we know it wasn't the same thing because it didn't have an impact. It didn't stop the fighting in Yemen. It didn't stop the fighting in Pakistan. It didn't stop the fighting in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq. The hands-on off approach of the Obama administration, the request for the EU to lead instead of the United States leading did not work. That is just a function of truth and facts. Yes, Michael Bowie, we were leading from behind. I think that was actually the quote of the Obama administration. We would lead from behind. We would let others take the forefront and we would support them. And that failed. It failed at every single step. And instead, we had greater problems. We then got a strong leader in. Whether you like that leader or not is immaterial. It doesn't matter. I'm not telling you that you have to like President Trump. I'm not. I'm not telling you have to be a conservative or that you have to become a Republican. But it is a fact that when we got the strong leader in, we got 4 Middle East peace treaties. And we had relative calm in the Middle East. Fighting decreased. Al-Qaeda had no power. ISIS has no power. That we saw the Iranian international attempts of global terror were reduced, partially because we stopped them from having any money. We turned off the spigot of money that was opened up by the Iran nuclear deal under the the Obama administration with Joe Biden as vice president. We stopped that spigot that John Kerry himself admitted was benefiting global terror around the world, that the United States was indirectly funding that global terror. Yes, John Kerry did say that. It is a fact that the United States was indirectly funding global terror through Iran. And we did have a strong president who stopped that. And then Joe Biden has come back and we turned it right back on again. Now you may say to me, well, Mike, what do you mean we turned it back on again? Real simple. As reported by Reuters on April 7th, a month ago, actually a little more than a month ago, Reuters told us that the U.S. restores $200 million. It was actually more than 200. It was $235 million in U.S. aid to Palestinians. This is coming from the Biden administration. That we, in fact, directly put $75 million in U.S. economic support and another $10 million in development funding, which means essentially cash. We gave $85 million essentially in cash to Palestine. And what did Palestine do with that money? Well, you only have to pay attention to the news for the last 7 days. Look at the news for the last 7 days. They bought rockets, a lot of them. They bought a ton of rockets. And they used those rockets to attack Israel. And they have been bombing Israel non-stop. I'm trying to find the article I have here. Here it is. And they bought rockets. They bought rockets from Iran. They bought rockets from Syria. The M302 from Syria. The Farj from Iran. They bought a ton of rockets. And in fact, over 3,000 rockets had been fired from Hamas against Israel in 7 days. That's well over 350 rockets being fired at civilians over and over again, targeting civilians, not military bases, not military installations, not the government of Israel, but the people, individuals, tourists, children. That's who we are seeing Hamas target. They are just attacking any and every human being in Israel with the $85 million worth of rockets that they were able to buy because the United States, under Joe Biden, gave them the funding. And we knew this as of April 7th. It isn't a question, it's a fact. Michael Bowie mentions 2,000. I've seen reports as high as 3,000. There are many and depending on which day you're looking at, we knew that as of the 13th, there were 1,500 rockets that have been fired. And I have seen several reports from news media, depending on where you're looking at, whether you're looking at the BBC or you're looking at United States based, or if you're looking at Al Jazeera and Israel, there's different reports. But as many as 3,000 rockets have been fired by Hamas. And that's because the Biden administration gave them the money. That's not just an indication of how weak that we see the Biden administration to be. It's how dumb he is. It's one thing to have a weak leader. It's really bad to have a weak and dumb leader. Like the Biden administration could not figure out, Kamala Harris could not figure out that if you gave $75 to $85 million to Hamas, that Hamas, a recognized global terror organization. This is a terrorist group. And I know the left loves to try and make them sound like they're some nice guys. They are a terrorist organization and recognized as such around the world. And Hamas, getting $85 million, is going to buy rockets and bombs and fund terror in Israel and around the Middle East. And the reaction from the Biden administration when those rockets, those 3,000, 2,000, when these thousands of rockets are being sent off and they're shooting and attacking people in Israel, the response from the Biden administration, according to the Washington Times on May 13th, is that he took away troops. The Pentagon pulled 120 U.S. troops out of Israel. The Pentagon answers to the Biden administration. They just pull a bunch of our troops out and left Israel on its own. And it doesn't matter that it was 120 troops or it could have been 12,000 troops. It doesn't matter. It is a signal and a message to the rest of the world of the weakness of the United States. We didn't send B-52 bombers. We didn't send a tactical nuclear submarine. We didn't send and mobilize troops in the region. We took our troops out. We left Israel with fewer American troops and less American support than the day before. That's what Hamas, the global terrorists, saw. That's what Iran, the global terrorists who are helping to fund this and selling the rockets to Hamas, that's what they saw. That's what Russia is seeing. That's what China is seeing. That's what North Korea is seeing. They are seeing the United States run away again and leaving our ally less supported than the day before. And when I say we're running away again, yes, when Vladimir Putin put 81,000 troops on the border of the Ukraine, the United States initially sent 2 destroyers to the region. Vladimir Putin directly and publicly said, turn those ships around. The Biden administration did it and sent the ships away, not defending the Ukraine, and instead decided we're going to do some economic sanctions that do not have impact against Russia. These are facts. And if you are only looking at CNBC or CNN, you're not going to get them. Dow mentions, I'm sure she knows, she doesn't care because her handlers, speaking about Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris doesn't care because her handlers want the chaos to use it for manipulation of low information voters or followers, general populace, and useful idiots. Dahlgren mentions, I'm so sick of watching our leaders running, do the job, get it done, go home. I wish they would, but that's not what we're seeing, and it's getting worse. This is a series of dominoes. It doesn't just stop unless you are actively jumping in there to make it stop. We need strength and leadership, which we do not have under Joe Biden. He couldn't stop a hacking, an electronic attack in America. He couldn't respond to an electronic hacking of American infrastructure. And now he has to actually deal with actual military rockets going off. In the meantime, he is in Syria, building up American troops to fight Syria and letting global terrorists like Iran and Hamas gain more power. If that isn't terrifying, folks, if that's not scaring you, if you don't have a comment on that, I don't understand. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not saying that you have to have a comment that says, Mike, you're right, but you should have some kind of comment, because I guarantee you this doesn't end with Hamas. It doesn't end with Iran attacking Israel. It means we get attacked as well. It means the rest of our allies get attacked as well. Because if the United States is not strong enough to protect our allies, everyone is at risk. Jason mentions that he thinks that Putin will annex Germany in a year. That would be global war. So no, I don't think they would do that. But I think they would put a bunch of troops on the border. I think they would promote socialism and communism again in Germany, helping to redivide that nation, that they would put troops on the border of the Ukraine and to start encroaching back on Lithuania and Latvia and on Poland, because the United States obviously isn't willing to back up its allies, that we would see at the same time China putting pressure on North Korea to enter into South Korea and to make life very difficult for Japan with the ocean and the Pacific Ocean, as it's been building up. China is building up its navy as we speak. And unlike the United States, they are only using men in their military to have a unified military so that they don't have to worry about any other issues, no social issues, no economic issues, no physical issues like uniforms and such. It's an all-man army that they're training, and they are implementing in their minds, they are inputting into them that is a good thing. Machoism is a good thing, that testosterone is a good thing, and they are pumping these kids up for a conflict as they build up a navy. And the United States is decreasing its navy. We are decreasing our military. We're decreasing our exposure around the world, especially in the Middle East. And as we are decreasing our troops, our allies have less protection, less safety, and less confidence in the United States standing up for the democracies that exist. And our enemies know it. Dow mentions that the whole time Putin would be screaming and laughing, role reversal. I'm sure that Putin has been laughing. And here's the thing, because we keep hearing from the Biden administration saying, I know these people. I've known these people because I was vice president. That's what we're hearing from the Biden administration. Well, it seems they know him too. And they seem to know that he is weak because they weren't doing this before. It was just 110, almost 120 days ago that they were not doing these things, that they backed down, that they wouldn't dare try to do these things. They wouldn't dare try to hack the United States infrastructure. They wouldn't make 3,000, they would never have allowed 3,000 rockets to be bought and held by Hamas to attack random citizens of Israel. It didn't happen, and it wouldn't happen. And now every one of our allies has to have this conversation. And if you think they are not having this conversation over the last week, that they are not sitting there saying the United States is doing nothing except retreating as its key ally. This is Israel. The United States has been an ally of Israel always. We have stood by them. Less and less under Democratic and progressive presidents, but we have always stood by them, and here we are retreating from them. This is a nation that is our strongest ally and our only ally in the Middle East. We have agreements with Jordan. We have agreements with the UAE, the Arab Emirates, but our ally is actually only Israel. And we're not doing anything to stand up for them. Instead, we are listening to American citizens like Antifa who are out protesting and attacking police cars and police officers and having protests, violent protests in the United States to support global terror as the United States does nothing. And I want people who are part of this movement, the whole BLM progressive socialist movement, the Democratic Socialists of America, including the ones in Ithaca, New York, I want you to understand very clearly, when you're standing for Hamas, you are standing for a terrorist organization. You are standing for global terror. You are supporting global terror. There is no if, no and, no but. Hamas is a global terrorist organization. And in supporting Hamas, you support terrorism. You may not like that. You may not like to hear that. You may want to say there's lots of reasons, and you may want to try and justify that, but it is a fact you cannot escape. When you support Hamas, you support terrorism. And no other, I don't care what the other justifications are for it. I don't want to hear about why you think it's a wonderful thing. You can't justify terrorism where suicide bombers are going in and blowing up children. You cannot justify 3,000 rockets randomly attacking citizens everywhere that are not part of military installations, just random citizens, just because they are alive. Dow mentions that I worry about Poland, Taiwan, and Japan in the absence of support from our leadership. And I am very worried about that, which is why I am talking about it today. And I want people to react to it. Hey, Jesse, it's good to see that you're here with us. Wasn't sure if Facebook was still up because the internet overlords don't like this conversation. They don't like the fact that I'm talking to you about something that, I mean, honestly, folks, you don't have to agree with me, but do me a favor. Look back at the news coverage you've seen out of the New York Times, out of the Washington Post. Look back at the coverage that you've seen out of MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS. Look at the major news media, even Fox for that matter. Look at the coverage and look at how many times in the last 100 and almost 20 days that I have been covering, talking about the problem with the Middle East getting worse, and then compare it to what they've said about the Middle East, if they've said anything at all. They've been telling you it's okay, it's all right, it's getting better, it's not so bad. I'm telling you it's getting worse, and this has been a problem we knew was coming, and I'm telling you, get ready, it's going to get even worse. And guess what? I've been right. They haven't. Which should make you pause, even if you are on the left, even if you're a progressive, even if you're a socialist, you should stop and pause and think about this, that, hey, global terror is on the rise right now. Maybe, just maybe, what the Biden administration is doing isn't working. Maybe, just maybe, giving Palestine, giving Hamas $85 million was a dumb idea because we knew they were going to turn around and buy rockets from Iran and from Syria, amongst other nations, including China, and that would result in the death of untold numbers of people until they run out of those rockets or until they run out of $85 million that the Biden administration gave them. Jesse mentions, I just wanted to say hi. I'm with my very little girlfriend, so I will rewatch later. Yes, that may be for the best. I would think so, Jesse. And I hope that she's going to have a great day. And you don't want to listen to it while you're on a date with your girlfriend. If she's on the left, they will be upset, which is why they use names. See, when they get upset and they don't have anything to counter here, because Hamas is a terrorist organization. That is a fact. And supporting Hamas is supporting terrorism. That is a fact. And because they have no answer to that, the only answer that you will ever hear out of the left, the progressives, are, oh, well, then you're just a racist. You're just a racist. You're a Islamophobe. They'll try and tie it into transgender somehow, and suddenly you're transphobe. They're going to call you every name in the book, trying to scare you. And they're always surprised by this. I have to tell you, this is my experience. Every time that they call you a name, they suddenly are surprised when you go, and that didn't stop me. I'm not breaking down into tears. I'm not stopping. You don't agree. Okay. You haven't refuted the facts that I have presented. You haven't refuted the conclusions that I am drawing from those facts. Instead, you said, well, you're just a bad person. Well, I don't care if you think I'm a good or bad person. Am I right? Is this conversation correct? Are we on the right track? Does this make sense? Are these things probable? And should we, if we do not have a plan, shouldn't we have a plan? Shouldn't we be discussing this as an American people? Because we are the government. Okay? The American people are the power of the government. Not unions, not political factions, the American people. And our government answers to us. And I understand that Joe Biden doesn't seem to understand that very simple concept. He doesn't get it because he thinks that all of the American people's options, all of your decisions are limited to whatever the government says your choices are. You can only do what the government is thinking. That is a lie. That is patently, absolutely a lie. That is factually incorrect. And we know that the Biden administration has gotten it wrong all the time. Look at what he said about the Second Amendment. You only have the right to have the firearms that the government allows you to have. And according to Biden, he said that that's the truth. That is a flat out absolute lie. It has never been true. Again, the government doesn't give us options. We decide what our options are. And our government should react to the options that we have said we want to see. Do we want to fund Hamas? You notice Biden didn't tell the American people that he was giving, he really didn't tell the American people that he was giving $235 million to Hamas through Palestine, which would promote global terror. Just in the same way that the Iran nuclear deal, you didn't hear a whole lot about the $150 billion that was given by the Obama administration through John Kerry and the Iran nuclear deal that was given to Iran to fund global terror. And I'm going to get to the comments in just one second, but I want to back up what I'm saying here because I want you to understand very clearly that it's not just me saying that Joe Biden is weak and that this is going down the wrong road. This is from The Guardian. The Guardian, as written on May 16th. And they're talking about Joe Biden is not doing well. That they thought they could just park the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And it's come back to bite them. They say, and I am quoting, Biden's usual sure touch is missing here. He clearly has no plan. And old reflexes die hard. The U.S. blocked a UN Security Council statement last week that was critical of Israel. Who cares if they have a statement that's critical? What's the important thing to take from this? From The Guardian? From The Guardian, the rest of the world paying attention to what's going on. Our ally paying attention to what's going on, which is not being reported in the U.S. news media, that Biden has no idea what he's doing. He has no clue. And it is absolutely evident by what's happening in the Middle East right now. And that is feeding the Middle East into more and more violence. And they're not the only ones that notice this. I mean, I want you to see. Did you think those were fireworks? Did you think that was a 4th of July display? No. That's Israel trying to defend itself against over 200 rockets being thrown at random civilians, not military installations, not the Israeli government, against random citizens, just moms and dads all around. And this is Hamas, the terrorist organization, with $85 million that came from the Biden administration, raining down over 200 rockets to try and kill average citizens, regular human beings going about their lives. And that is the weakness of the Biden administration. They gave money to terrorist organizations, and those terrorist organizations are attacking our allies, and he has no idea what he should do about that. That is a problem. In fact, and I will show you in a few moments, that right now, the Iranian government, here it is. Let me show it to you. The Iranian government, this is from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, on Iran. Iran military commander backs Hamas and called with militant group's leader. Yes. So we are watching the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IGRC, the leading terror organization in the world, which is from Iran, is backing up and celebrating that Hamas, another terrorist organization, is attacking Israel, and the United States is doing nothing about it. Please, if you're on the left and you think I am misunderstanding this, that I am somehow missing evidence, that I am not talking about this, please, I want to hear your voice. I want you to hear me justify how Hamas is not a terrorist organization, as everyone well knows it is. To try and explain why 3,000 missiles being shot at average Israeli citizens going about their daily lives isn't an act of terror. Please explain that to me. And that the United States is absolutely weak in its response, both in creating this problem and now in dealing with it. Let me go back to some of the comments. And we see that Dow mentions that I really like the phrase, quote, speak quietly but carry a big stick, end quote. Our leadership has been attempting to use the buy-off path of foreign policy for decades with no fruitful peace. You can't buy peace. You cannot buy off an organization like Iran, like Hamas, who believe that by religion, by their birth and by their religion, they are right, that they must eliminate, which means kill, everyone who doesn't believe what they believe. And if you're starting with an idea that someone has a fundamental belief that you should be eliminated, you should be killed because you don't believe what they believe, then you can't buy that person. This isn't a kind of wishy-washy thought. This is an absolute faith. And you can't buy that. You cannot buy that. Shauna, hello. It's good to see you, Shauna. Shauna says, maybe the CIA and all those alleged, quote, security, end quote, agencies should stop training and arming the, quote, terrorists, end quote, organizations. please, the U.S. government officials are the terrorists. I disagree with that in part, Shauna. Yes, it may not be in our best interest to constantly train various loose cannons, because we've seen that come back against us with Al Qaeda. We see that with the PPK right now in Turkey, and I've talked about that. If you haven't, look it up. The PPK is the next version of ISIS or Al Qaeda that we will see in the world. They are a quasi-terrorist organization, and the United States trained and funded them. And I agree, that's a problem. But the problem is we're making half decisions. We're not actually thinking about what we're doing. We're funding Palestine and Hamas, and we're surprised that they bought rockets and are trying to kill Israelis with it. We're giving hundreds of billions of dollars to Iran, and we're wondering why immediately afterwards global terror went up in the world. Come on, we got to think this through. This isn't hard to figure out. If I give hundreds of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to terrorists, don't be shocked when the terrorists try and kill people. Innocent people, children. Michael Bowyer mentions Antifa and BLM are domestic terrorists. And I would agree that Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization. Shauna mentions that it's delusional to think that you have any control over this foreign entity. The U.S. government declared its independence from the people. She goes on to say, they know what they do. Destroy this nation. Biden is not special in this regard. And she's making a statement against Israel, which I do not agree with, and I will not repeat. And she believes that Israel is the bad guy. No, and she says, she's asking me if I think one of her statements was anti-Semitic. It was. Yes, it was anti-Semitic. And that's why I'm not repeating it. Now, no, I don't believe that Israel believes that they have to wipe out the Middle East, that they have to wipe out Arabs. No, it isn't part of their religion. It's not part of Judaism to eliminate people who don't believe what they believe. That is not a fact. I don't care if you have Jewish children. You can still make an anti-Semitic statement. What? That doesn't bar you. What is it with this idea in American politics today that someone says, well, I can't say, what is it, BLM. I can't be racist because I'm black. That's blatantly stupid and wrong. You can't say that. To say, oh, I have Jewish children, so therefore I can't say something that's anti-Semitic. That's blatantly wrong. It's not true. It's not factually correct. No, I'm not doing with you what BLM does. You made an anti-Semitic statement. You don't get to say, well, and I'm fine with that because I have Jewish children. That doesn't change it from being an anti-Semitic statement. I'm telling you that that's not an excuse. I'm not telling you that you are a demon because of it. I'm not telling you that you should be silenced because of it. I'm not telling you that you can't live your life because of it. But if you're asking me, will I call you out for it? Yes, I will. You made an anti-Semitic statement. It's in the comments. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't agree with it. I don't believe in that statement. And I think it was wrong. And I will call you out on that. And I will call you out when you say, well, but I have an excuse. No, you don't. It's still anti-Semitic. Racism is racism. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. The same way I would not allow someone to say that Islam is something that it is not. I don't blame all members of Islam, all Muslims, for the actions of Iran and the actions of Hamas. It's not because they're Muslim that I'm upset with Iran and Hamas. It's because they are terrorists. I am upset with Iran and Hamas. It has nothing to do with their religion. It has nothing to do with their race. Do you notice there is a difference in the way I work? When I am wording these things, I am talking about Iran, not Muslims. I'm talking about Hamas, not Muslims. I'm not talking about Arabs and their skin color or their beliefs. I'm talking about the terrorist organizations. There is a difference. I'm not calling you anti-American, Shauna. I've never said that. I am telling you about politics, and I'm telling you about a statement, and I'm not excusing, and I'm not here. Yes, I am a conservative Republican, absolutely. I am a strong believer in a United States that has a strong military because the world relies on it. At the same time, I am not going to fall down that slope, which is not that slippery, to say that I believe in anti-Semitism or that I'm going to use the same racist tactics that I see being used by socialists against me every day. I'm not going to try and call someone something that they have not proven. When I was called a transphobe on Tuesday by members of the far left, of members of BLM, and members of Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow and Plot, you know what I said to them? Show me the proof. There's a difference. I'm not saying I called out what you said because of what you said. I'm not saying that you are an evil person. I'm not demonizing you or anyone else. Now, if you want to disagree with Israel and you want to say that their government is making bad actions, that they're bad actors, I want to hear that. But if you want to tell me something that's anti-Semitic, no, I don't want to hear that. If you want to tell me how the Israeli government could have done something better, that's fantastic. If you can tell me, if you're going to tell me that, well, it's justified because they're Jewish, they should get 3,000 rockets launched against them, no, I don't agree with that. That is anti-Semitic, and I disavow that. There is a difference. You want to tell me about the government and what that government is doing and the politics and how that is affecting things? Absolutely. But I don't believe that the United States gives up on its allies because of the religion of our allies or the region that they live in, or that we should fund people who are known global terrorists. I can't get past that. The Biden administration is actively and has actively been funding global terrorists. What has that got to do with freedom and democracy in the world? I do not know. It is a statement that the United States is confused as a nation because our leader doesn't know what he's doing, and he has absolutely no plan, and he's not thinking about the consequences of the actions that he is doing. And no one else in the news media seems readily available and willing to stand up and say that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the White House, whoever's in control over there, because I don't think it's Joe Biden, have no idea what they are doing, and they are taking steps that are absolutely making things worse. And we demonstrably can see that difference from December to today. So I want to be sure about that, and I'm taking a moment here because I want to make sure I'm talking about governments, I'm talking about politics, I'm not talking about individuals. There are good and bad individuals everywhere. There are good people who are Muslim, there are bad people who are Muslim, there are good people who are Jewish or Christian, and there are bad people who are Jewish or Christian. That exists. There are good people of every color in the world, and that's a known fact. When we blanket these people, that's a problem. When I speak about leftists, and maybe I should bring this up, when I'm talking about the left, I'm talking about a political movement, not a certain color of skin. I'm talking about an ideology of politics and life that has been clearly defined both by its actions and its belief system, and it has been enumerated by news media, by these individuals on a repeated basis. We can go to the BLM website and we will see its list of demands for this country and how they are socialist in nature and how they destroy our democracy. That is a fact. We have that. It is proven. I've shown it on this site before. When I attack BLM, I am attacking that ideology of that organization. When I am attacking the left, I am attacking their ideology as described by the Democratic Socialists of America, especially the Ithaca chapter that has published, documented that they will use violence to get their will. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with organizations like Antifa and Plot that will use violence and will use words to try and discredit and destroy individuals' lives for the mere purpose of advancing their political ideology. And I will say that. So when I say the left, when I say BLM, when I say Antifa and progressive leaders of tomorrow, I'm talking about what they have done and what they have said and the ideology of those organizations. But I'm not picking on the people. I'm not assuming that every Democrat is a member of Antifa, that every Democrat is a member of progressive leaders of tomorrow and the far left. That isn't the truth. The far left is a splinter. They are a tiny fraction. Some have said that it is somewhere between 7 to 11% of all of the people in the Democratic Party actually fall into the far left. The plot, the BLM, the Antifa, they got a really big mouth. I mean, listen to AOC. She's constantly speaking. And it doesn't matter that she has no idea what she's talking about. She has no understanding of economics. She has no understanding of the consequences of the things that she's talking about. But she's just got a big mouth, and she gets on TV on a regular basis. She's quoted all the time, even though it makes no sense what she's talking about. And if you actually did the math, nothing she said is correct. But that doesn't mean she represents all Democrats. She really doesn't. I've talked to many Democrats. I've looked at the polling. I've looked at the polling within her own district. People don't agree with her. That doesn't mean that she's the ideal of Democrats, but she is the ideal of a lot of progressives. And I do agree that it is perfectly fine, and I will not dispute that we see many governments lie at many levels about many things. But I do think there is a very big difference between, as much as any government may or may not lie, there is a difference between a government like Iran that is a global terrorist leader. They promote terrorism, suicide bombings of individuals around the globe. There is a difference between that and saying that Joe Biden is lying to you about the infrastructure of the United States because he's not spending enough money to make it worthwhile. There is a big difference there. They are nowhere near themselves. So do both nations lie? Absolutely. Do I see the United States committing the global terror that I see in Iran? No, I don't. Do I see the genocide that China is doing being done by the United States? No, I don't. There is a difference. And we as Americans need to have this conversation, and it should be by a much bigger audience. Please, folks, this is why I ask every week, please subscribe. Show this to other people. Ask them to subscribe, and to join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to be part of this conversation. Not because I'm right, not because I have the only view, but this is a conversation that people need to have and continue well after this is done, to actually understand what is going on in our nation and in our world, and to realize that the consequences of what is being done doesn't end with the end of this video, the end of whatever article you read. It keeps going. It was April when Joe Biden gave Hamas, or indirectly gave Hamas, $85 billion. A month later, they have 3,000 missiles at least, because that's how many they fired so far at average average Israeli citizens. People going about their lives, going to the store, going with their kids, going to a park. There are people who have been at the beach that are being attacked for being at the beach and being Israeli by rockets. And I showed you in the video, I just showed you, of the Israelis trying to knock down all those rockets. That's 90% accurate so far. 10% are getting through. So that means there's been like 300 of these rockets that are getting through, trying to kill people for the mere fact that they exist. I'm sorry, you don't get to justify that by saying, oh, well, I have a different political ideology. That doesn't justify. If you want to tell me that the people of Palestine are unloved and unwanted anywhere in the Middle East, which is a fact. Nobody wants them, and everybody's upset with them. And if you're telling me, well, that justifies someone dropping 3,000 rockets on another, trying to eliminate human beings, that's not the same thing. To say you don't, if you want to say that that the people of Palestine don't have enough rights under the government of Israel or Jordan or anywhere else in the Middle East, because they have second-class citizenship in all of the Middle East, that doesn't justify dropping a bomb on someone's head. And hang on, we have a call. Hello, and thank you for joining us on No Soundbites Allowed. This is your host, Michael Voss, and with whom am I speaking?
Hey, Mike, it's Jason.
Hey, Jason. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I wanted to talk about the situation with the, Israel and the bombings.
Absolutely. We look forward to that. We encourage everyone to be, that's why the phone number keeps showing up. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's one of those things where, when you want to look at political perspectives, and I do follow, Larry Sharp and the Libertarians and things like that. And, I've taken surveys in the past, myself, and I found that when I take these things, when it says either you're a liberal, a conservative, or libertarian, a lot of times I always, check the, when I take these things, I always end up in the libertarian aisle.
Okay.
But it's circumstances like this where, we're dealing with Palestine, and all of a sudden, the libertarian view seems like, you do you and I'll do me, and we'll just, keep out of this stuff. It's never where I fall, I mean, I'm a, strong supporter, of the individuals in Israel, and, what is happening right now, and the attitude, and I can't take that stance, and part of it is I suppose, to me, maybe it's a difference in actually understanding the history of what, has happened in that region, and the number of opportunities that, the individuals of, the Palestinians have had to actually, had peace. How many, I mean, you can go back to what, World War I, World War II, or World War I, where, the Israel, the situation there with, what was it, Egypt, and all the land that was taken. Then finally it was given back to them, so they could accept peace. And then what ends up happening is that Israel gets, slammed again. And then, they give a little more of a, land, and they get slammed again. And then you look at World War II, it's like literally the individuals, who now are considered Palestinians were hand in hand kumbaya with Hitler, helping them as people were fleeing out of Germany. As they're coming down, they were just helping escort them right back so they go to the, concentration camps to get, slaughtered, And here, and then we're now looking at this situation, and people are, I can't stand it. We're watching the bombings, hit, and people are saying, well, what, they fight back, they do this, and I'm like, really? I mean, you do realize that, the Israel, when those military commanders actually literally call up and tell everybody that, look, we're taking this building out really kindly for you because, you got a terrorist organization there, and we want to eliminate that. And so, and meanwhile, you've got Hamas just, Harry Carey blowing everything to smithereens. And, the perception of the difference between the military action between the two, individuals, it's like, it just blows my mind, I mean, if it wasn't so political, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, I don't even know what to say, because it's like if it wasn't a very aggressive tactic that Israel took against Hamas and just decided to all of a sudden wipe them out, and everybody did just say they had the philosophy as you do you, and everybody does what they want, and everybody steps back. I mean, Israel would end it. But it doesn't happen that way, because it's like there's the constant hostility that continues, to come up. And, I mean, obviously, I mean, people talk about a proxy war. Yeah, I mean, there's a proxy war. I mean, you've got situations where, Putin, loves this situation where everything gets all tied in. You got Iran, that is, hand in hand with Putin, and that whole triangle there, and a lot of these different, Arabs as well. And then not to mention the fact is that, people don't understand exactly what's going on in Pakistan, is that country literally is completely divided almost in half, with extremists and kind of more of a moderate, front. And at any moment that could basically, flip either way. It's such a complex thing, and it's like I said, it's very frustrating to watch. When people just say, "Well, oh, they're bombing here," and you look at our media, it's terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible. And I do want to address, because there's conversation also going on in this. Let me address something here, which you may not be aware of. Now, 7 days ago, the rocket attacks started happening. And so for someone to justify Hamas or to attack Israel on this, I want to be very, very clear, because the news media is focused on this building that was blown up, that they're very focused on this idea that a building that had the AP and Al Jazeera news stations in there also had Hamas terrorists in that same building. And the Israeli people were told, or rather, all the people were told, get out of the building because we're about to strike it. And everyone evacuated the building. They had over an hour to get everyone out of the building, and they did. And AP is upset because they lost a bunch of equipment. No human beings, but they lost a bunch of equipment. It's a multi-million-dollar company, tens of millions of dollars. And they're worried about a little bit of equipment that they lost there. Who cares? But the fact is, we have the United States President Biden is more upset, and has been reported more upset in the news media about the fact that a building was struck where the AP was, than the fact that they were striking against a global terror organization that happened to be in the same building and was terrorizing the AP, which is why the AP never wanted to report about it, and that they gave everyone a way out. But again, that still doesn't justify 3,000 rockets being used against civilians. Or am I wrong? You tell me.
Well, and the other thing too is that one of the things you'll never hear or report, but I could probably assume the simple fact is it's kind of like one of those things where you can't tell me that obviously they target this thing. They know that, it's got, to me, what it is like you got 10 seconds to get out with all, the lives.
They gave people an hour.
Yeah, you give them an hour, and that's a lot of time, But the thing is that one of the thoughts I have is that how many munitions and ammo and other things that were basically, hidden in that building, right? And so they knew that. I mean, they could take the building down and they're going to get rid of all those rockets and all that other stuff that potentially would be hidden in those areas, and making it a valued target. Because obviously, if they've got a load of stuff in there and they level that building, well, they're not going to be able to get to any of that and continue to bomb the crap out of it, Do they have, do we hear reports on that? Do we understand that? Well, no, not really. But the thing is I wouldn't doubt that the intelligence of Israel, because why else would you knock a building down and then tell a bunch of people to leave unless there's actually more there than what is there? And then so you have to actually think logically here. And so my assumption is that there was a hell of a lot more probably in that target than we will ever know because of military secrets that they can't release to us.
Well, the United States has already talked to Israel yesterday, as a matter of fact, on May 15th. And President Biden and the United States intelligence were told why that building was targeted. And there is proof and evidence that was provided to the United States government. And this isn't really being reported by U.S. media, but it is being reported by The Guardian, by the BBC, by international news, that the United States was told why it was a target and why they blew it up. And that they gave the AP and Al Jazeera and all the people more than enough time to get everyone out of the building, which they did. And the United States accepts, and so has the rest of the world, has accepted the evidence that the Israeli government has provided on why they did this. The difference is that the United States news media is not. And why is the United States news media not telling you this? Same reason that they didn't tell you that we were sending in more troops into Syria, that we were becoming more aggressive in the Middle East. That the same reason that they didn't emphasize how Joe Biden was sent with his tail between his legs by Putin when Putin was making aggression against the Ukraine, which is still ongoing. And the reason why they don't tell us about why the United States under Biden has not addressed the genocide of the Uyghurs in China. It's because the press is predominantly in a socialist and progressive ideology. They approve of this. They want this to happen. They want you to not know so that they can spin the story any way they want and destroy America's allies. That is my belief. That is the conclusion I get from the evidence when I look at international news and compare it to U.S. news, and then just apply simple logic and say, look what's happening. This is what caused it. What's going to be the result? I mean, does my logic not make sense?
Like some point times I had to start thinking about people on a psychological level and kind of thinking about where the media has come from and kind of like their liberal ideology. And it really comes to a point where I think that people get, I mean, especially on the left, they just, the common sense where they can actually perceive that something evil is going to destroy them. They just don't have the understanding of how evil is, And this concept here is where if you put your gun down, I'll put my gun down. And that's their philosophy. And we all know what happens when you put your gun down. You get your brains blown out if you put your gun down. But the thing is that I think that, culturally, to a certain degree, I think, especially, I mean, it's always, primarily been the media, and especially the leftist media. I mean, they've embraced that sort of philosophy. And anybody who actually, refused to put that gun down, like, for example, if Israel, well, they didn't put their gun down. That's why, there's still war. If they actually put their gun down, then, there wouldn't be in war, Not to mention the fact that any time in history that they have actually, done anything remotely similar to that sort of thing, that they've nearly, been demolished throughout history if you actually look at the archives. But like I said, that's the attitude, And it's so infuriating, frustrating to watch, the media and and to understand where, like, where they're coming from, because I said it's just the most primitive kind of thing, and that belief that says, you do it first, we'll both do it together, and then we'll all live in harmony. We'll all, hug it out like a bunch of Care Bears. It's a joke.
It is. There's a statement I want to make for everyone that's watching, but I want to make sure that, was there something else that you wanted to say, Jason, at this moment?
No, I'm good.
Okay, well, as always, I thank you for calling into the show and sharing some of your thoughts, and I do largely agree exactly with what you said.
All right, yep, have a good one. Bye.
All right. So I want to address something because I'm seeing it in the comments here, and I want to be very, very explicit. This channel and myself, Michael Vasquez, also known as Michael Voss, my federal alias, I want to be very clear. We do not agree with strawman arguments that just make enemies out of the blue. We do not agree with allegations being placed against other individuals without any shred of proof, that you're just classifying a group of people as evil without a reason. If you don't like the Israeli government, that's fine. I'm not telling anyone that they have to. To call them evil and to say that they have done something that there is no proof of is entirely different. I wouldn't allow someone, and I disagree with anyone, if you want to say something about people because they are trans, I have a problem with that. If you want to tell me where the problem is because of the trans agenda, which is a difference, then that's one thing. But to pick on someone because they're trans, that would be bad. To pick on someone because they're black is bad. To call them names and use racial slurs against someone is wrong. We stand against that. We don't believe on this channel in any group, any organization, or any individual that uses intimidation, fear, threats of violence, or acts of violence to cause others to believe something against their will. We have always said that. I will always say that, and this is what I believe. So if you want to tell me that you don't agree with a certain government, that's fine. I don't agree with the Iranian government. I don't agree with the communist Chinese government. I don't agree with much of what is going on with the Russian government or the North Korean government. And I am giving you explicit reasons why. I am showing you the evidence as reported by the left-leaning news media why these things are a problem. I have a problem with communism in general and socialism as well. And I have given on this program many facts and reasons why that is the case. I'm not just making aspersions and just pulling out things out of the air. There are facts here. So when I see someone that is making attacks against any country, and in this case, we're talking about Israel, based on religion, I have a problem with that because we're not talking about the religion of Israel. We're not talking about the religion of Islam. We're talking about the political organizations and their actions, especially the military ones and the United States. It's not about the United States being Christian and other nations not. It's not about that. To bring that argument into this is a distraction and it is useless. It gives no benefit. It is not part of the conversation. If you want to tell me that you believe the Palestinian people should be treated better, that's one discussion. I will tell you again that even if that's what you want, that doesn't justify attacking innocent citizens with suicide bombs and rockets. If you think that the Israeli government has overreacted to 3,000 rockets being fired at its citizens who are just going about their daily lives, then that's a discussion you can have with us. And to the most part, the strikes by Israel, as reported by the world news following this, is that it has been highly surgical with very little collateral damage. So they have been somewhat reserved in their reaction. I cannot say that I would be as reserved in the United States. And as I recall, when the United States citizens were attacked on 9/11, which we have no evidence was an inside job or done by Jews or anything like that, what we do know, and the people who have taken credit for it, were Al-Qaeda. And what we do know about that is that at the time, the United States government was willing to, well, people in the United States, many people in the United States, immediately afterwards, were willing to use a nuke to turn all of Iraq into sand, into glass. That would have been an overreaction, although that was the feeling that the United States had at that time, which has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with defending our people and dealing with a reaction, a military and political reaction to an action against us. So I in the comments, when I'm seeing that there are people who are talking about religion and they're making unfounded allegations, I would say to you, please stop. Because unfounded allegations is not what this program is about. That is why I go through great effort to make sure that before every show, I have dozens of sources that I provide on all aspects of the things that I'm speaking about so that you can have evidence to see where I'm drawing the conclusions from and that you can see it in the description so that you can review it for yourself. So that you have a better understanding, because that's what free speech is about, is to expand our understanding and to make better conclusions by having a discussion. That's what I want. That's what this program is about. It's not about casting aspersions. It's about discussing the issues that affect us based on the concrete evidence that we have before us. I think that's very straightforward. And people who don't agree with that, and if you think that, no, we should just cast aspersions and that we should just hate people because of their skin color, because of their religion, because of their sex, their sexuality, their sexual preference, any of these intrinsic or arbitrary things, that's fine. I don't mind if you don't watch this channel. I would love to get to 1,000 subscribers, and I'm hoping to get to 1,000 subscribers. I hope to get to 1 million subscribers one day. But I can live without someone who believes in casting aspersions based on straw men. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm not desperate for attention. I'm not desperate for money. Yes, I would like more money. Yes, I would like more attention. Yes, I would like to expand this conversation to more people around the world than we already reach. Absolutely. But I'm not going to do so at the cost of my intrinsic beliefs or at the expense of other groups of people. I will never do that. That's why I am upset with BLM. That's why I'm upset with the progressive movement. That's why I'm upset with socialists and communism, because that's what they do. And I've had that happen to me over and over again, as recently as Tuesday, when I was called a phobe because I was standing up for my local school board and my beliefs, without talking about anyone's gender, sexuality, color, or anything else. And I was attacked for that. So yes, I am sensitive to that, and I don't want to see anyone else get attacked in that way. I would not stand for that, and I don't stand for that. So one of the arguments being made, and I know there's many comments here, is that when a neighbor who continuously wanders into your house, lays claim to your fridge and its contents, despite laws establishing they shouldn't or can't, well, what do? And that's one of the things. We've seen the problem with the Middle East, and there are many, besides the fact that they have their own internal issues with each other and have had some since, before the Middle Ages, is that there is no communication that's going on, and people cannot live with the idea that someone else is different. Sadly, we are also hearing that here in the United States. And I believe that is true because we have a weak president and we have a weak government. We see people who bow down to the progressive left and they kiss their butts because they're afraid to say, no, I don't agree. And it's okay for you to have a belief, but I don't have to share it. And that they have transferred that idea that if you're listening to individuals like Joe Biden, who's saying, since he cannot disagree with the progressive left for whatever his reasoning is, that the American people cannot disagree with the progressive left. Again, let me go back to what he actually said. The rule is simple. Get vaccinated or wear a mask until you do. The choice is yours. That is a false choice. That is a false logic. That is saying that Joe Biden feels like he has no choice and that he must bow to the progressives by either being vaccinated and or wearing a mask. That does not mean that is the American people's choice. There is a massive difference in that. There is a massive difference in being able to say that the United States wants more freedoms for the Palestinian people and giving $85 million to Hamas, which is a global terrorist organization. They're not the same thing. And we need to make that, and we need to have that conversation. And did you notice that almost all of the news that I have to be able to pull to talk about what's going on in Israel and Palestine and the Middle East almost exclusively has to come from outside the United States government? We should be really upset and worried about that. Why do I have to go to The Guardian, the Daily Mail, the Israeli Times, to Reuters and the Associated Press? Why do I have to go to these outside countries and nations and not rely on the United States news media to give us actual information about what's going on? And when they do, to give us the tiniest of snippets about that information, like when the Pentagon, the tiniest snippet of information that we got was when the Washington Times tells us about the troops that are being pulled out of Israel on May 13th. And the entire story, this is it. We're talking like 7 paragraphs. That's it. That's all they had to say. Is that, yeah, we pulled the troops out. There's more to that story than just 7 paragraphs. There's a massive amount of implications about that. There are things that cause that to happen and what is a consequence of that. There's more to this story. And to not tell the American people that, to leave out the fact that we didn't just blow up a building because that's where the AP is, but because a global terrorist organization that is actively sending rockets against average human beings is also in that building. We need to talk about that story. Why the president has isolated and said, we have to protect our news media. Wait a minute. They're not the priority. The priority are the average citizens being struck by rockets. That's the story. And whether that person happens to be Israeli or Jewish or Christian or Arabic, or it doesn't matter. Male, female, transgender, I don't care what they are. It doesn't matter. The concern should be, why did we fund a terrorist organization that has now used rockets to try and kill innocent civilians? There is the story. The beginning and the end of the story should be that. Why is our government so weak that they are bending over backwards, capitulating with a fraction of a political party that demands that we give money to terrorist organizations so that they can kill innocent civilians? That is the problem with America right now. That's what's changing in the world right now. We have world leaders who are capitulating to the smallest segment of their population in the most extreme manner possible, that is, as a consequence, leading to the death of innocent civilians. That is a problem. If you disagree with me on that premise, please do explain that. I want that premise that I have just mentioned to be very, very clear, and I've explained it very clearly. And guess what? You can change that from Israel to Iran to, you can go anywhere in the world with that same question. Why are we allowing, and why are we not speaking about, when world leaders capitulate to the smallest segments, fractures of political parties, and empower global terrorists to kill innocent civilians? It isn't about Israel. It isn't about Palestine. It's happening everywhere in the world. And this is a problem. And this has become a problem in the last less than 5 months. In less than 120 days, that is the approach that the world government has taken. The governments of the world have taken. And that is a problem, and it demands that we as American citizens talk about this, because we are the beacon of freedom, of democracy, and our ability to have free speech, it calls out to this issue. But, others may not agree. And Shauna, I don't agree with you. There's a bunch of what you've said I do not agree with. I do not support it. I do not support many of the things you've alleged. And I would ask you, stop saying it. Just stop. I don't think that the others who are watching the program want to see that and want to hear that. And I don't want to hear that. You have a right to say whatever you want. Have your channel and say it on your channel. I don't agree with what you've said. And you ask, why is the U.S. supporting a democracy? Why wouldn't the United States support a democracy? Why should the United States support communism or socialism? Failed governments that don't work. Failed ideologies that don't work. In the history of the world, we have over 75 years of experience saying that socialism has not worked anywhere in the world, that communism has not worked anywhere in the world. And I know that people like to pick and choose and say, well, what about the Nordic states? They're socialist. No, they're not. No, that's a lie. That is a lie that has been promoted by individuals like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that those nations themselves, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the rest of them, they have all denied and said and refuted and said that is not true. So why should the United States support failed systems that have led to and when we're talking about socialism, we're talking about communism, we're talking about systems that have led to the largest number of people who have died in the world ever. Put all the wars together. More people have died from socialism and communism than all wars put together. So why in the world would I want the United States government, a democratic republic, why would I want us to support a failed ideology that has killed more people than anything known to man throughout the history of man? If you believe that democracy is a failed system, that is your opinion. And if you believe that socialism and communism are better, even though they have demonstrably and historically and continuously been shown to fail, that is your choice as well. I will not dispute that. That is your right to believe that as an American citizen, but I will not support it. I didn't say that democracies, that there haven't been wars and that democracies haven't had wars. And I'm not saying that the American government or any government is perfect. We're human beings. Of course we're not. But that's not the conversation. That isn't the conversation. The conversation is that the weakness of the United States has enabled, and the direct actions of a weak president have enabled the ability for global terrorists to attack innocent citizens. That is the conversation, and that is the conversation that our news media will not give the American people. And that is a problem. And if you want to shout about your ideals of a better government, fantastic. That isn't the conversation right now, Shauna. And please stop crowding out all the other voices of individuals like Dal, like Mavis, like Jason, like Mike Bowie, who are watching the program, and many, many others that have other ideas. Because you're not addressing the question at hand. You're trying to usurp this. And that's not what this is about. So we're going to take some time for Shauna to calm down. Because this program is not the Libertarian Hour or the Progressive Hour or even the Democratic Hour. This is about having a conversation. In particular, the conversation we're trying to have is about what's going on in the Middle East and how it's going to affect us. Because we've talked so far about what's happening there. And I think I've made it very clear, based on all the international news, about what's going on. And that the story is changing now. And the news media is changing the way people are seeing this. And they're trying to focus on something that isn't the core issue. They're not trying to deal with the core issue. And the core issue is, again, what I've said, I believe. Unless someone can explain to me, because I do not accept and I do not believe that there is a justification for dropping bombs on innocent people. And I don't care which government does it. I would not want the United States government to drop bombs on innocent civilians. I would call that out. I would not accept that from the British government. I would not accept that from the German, the Peruvian, the Canadian. I don't care what nation you want to name. One of the reasons why I point out Venezuela on a regular basis is Venezuela took away the right to defend themselves. This, not the Second Amendment, but the the Venezuelan right to be able to be armed and to defend yourself. And because they did that, they then turned around and killed their own people, as reported by the New York Times, that they killed over 5,200 people, and that has gotten higher since that report 3 years ago. I have a problem when a government does that. The fact that it happens to also be a socialist nation also tells me why I don't like socialism. Because I do not routinely see that in governments around the world where democracies or some form of democracy exists, that they are disarming their people and then turning around and killing them. You don't see that in Britain. Since the 1300s, roughly the 1300s, maybe the 1500s, if I remember correctly, the British government outlawed firearms, but they didn't turn around and then kill their own people because they disabled the ability of those people to be armed. So I'm not upset with Great Britain, but I am with socialism, and I am with Venezuela, and I am in China, where they have disarmed their people, and now they are doing a genocide against them. I am upset about it where you see it in Iran, and they are the global leader of terror in the world. There is a priority here, and there is a problem here, and our news media are not having that conversation, and they really, really have to have that. And when people try to use this channel to promote, in my opinion, that, then no, we're not having that conversation, because I don't support that. And by the way, just because you don't see the video doesn't mean that Shauna's not continuing to go on and rant on the comments. And someone would say, well, Mike, aren't you going to ban her? No, I'm not. Because there's a double-edged sword to freedom of speech. See, if I were a member of BLM, if I were a member of Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, otherwise known as PLOT, if I was a member of Citizen Action and the far left, then the only answer that I would have is, well, now we have to silence you. If I was one of the internet overlords, like Facebook or Twitter or at times YouTube and Google, then my only answer at this moment would be, well, we have to shut you down. We have to silence you completely. No, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case. I think we allow people to show themselves for what they are. We let their arguments be what they are. That we allow more speech to correct bad speech, to correct bad ideology, to be able to see the flaws because we see the flaws, because we're able to see what is going on, because we're able to have those conversations. It's one of the reasons why BLM, PLOT, Antifa, the far left, they're cowards. They won't show up on this program. They won't come in and do an interview. They have avoided, and I have seen them actively state that they will not talk to the news media. They will not talk to the American people. They will not get into a debate or a discussion about their beliefs, and they will shout down anyone that doesn't agree with exactly what they have told you you should know. That's a problem. That's an act of cowardice. That's a lack of security. They're very insecure because they don't know, or rather they know that they can't defend the things they are saying. Just as Antifa right now, as we have shown you, is out in California and they are rioting and they are causing problems for the police and others because they support Hamas, a global terrorist organization. They can't defend that, which is why they won't go on the news and tell you that. They won't go on the news and say they support terrorism. But they do support terrorism because they will go out and march. And let me ask you, what does Hamas and the global terror of Hamas and of Israel, of Iran, if Iran's global terror and Hamas's global terror, what does that have to do with Black Lives Matter or the ideology of Black Lives Matter here in the United States? You know, and that's a big question. And it's a question that should be asked. Now, Dow mentioned something in the comments. I don't know if I can show that clearly. Can I bring that up? No, I can't. So, but we had a comment from Dow, one of the commenters on the show, and he says, if stating that Israeli state does not have the same right to self-defense as the individual, I would ask you then, which active party in the conflict has the eradication of the other as its basis? And it's very clear. In this case, we know that it's Hamas. Hamas wants to kill innocent civilians. We see Israel going out of its way to try and limit the amount of innocents that could possibly be harmed. But it seems that the Biden administration doesn't get that. That they're not willing to be strong enough to stand up and tell Hamas to stop, to tell Iran to stop the fighting. Even the UAE, United Arab Emirates, has come out and said that Hamas has to stop. That they have made the statement that they said, we are still ready and willing to promote civil projects in cooperation with the Palestinian Authority and under UN management in Gaza, but our necessary condition is calm. If Hamas does not commit to complete calm, it is dooming the residents of the Strip to a life of suffering. Its leaders must understand that their policies are first and foremost hurting the people of Gaza. That's from the UAE. So it's very clear. Now, you may disagree with the United Arab Emirates. You may disagree with Israel. But I think you don't disagree with the idea that no terrorist group, that any group that would target innocent civilians, not military targets, but innocent civilians, is wrong. That's it. It's that simple. And we need a president who can say that simply and to make it clear. And when that president does make that clear, the rest of the world will react because we have a president who is strong. And they will respect a strong president, especially the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. Not to change what those governments do, but to stop terrorist groups from committing acts of terror. Is that too much to ask for? Is that too much to expect out of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House? And that has nothing to do with someone's religion, their race, their color of skin, their anything. It has very simply to do with only one thing. Let's stop the terrorism. I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't think anyone would question that. And there's a lot more to this story, obviously, and I will have many more of the quotes. I mean, one of the things that tells me, and I want you to hear this, because you probably have not seen this, because this comes from the BBC itself. And I want you to see, on the BBC, this was on today, May 16th, today, the BBC was speaking with a member of Hamas, the Palestinian organization, and he asked him 3 times for a simple answer to a simple question. And this is the 3rd time that he is asking this in this interview, as you can see, and will be in the description. And I want you to understand very clearly what is being said here.
Let's just focus on what's happening in Gaza. You mentioned the word extremists. Israel would say that Hamas are extremists. Hamas are firing rockets into southern Israel. Would you say to Hamas now, stop firing those rockets?
I can say it, let me say openly, that all violence is because of the occupation, because of the oppression, because of the brutality of the Israeli occupation in Al-Aqsa Mosque. You didn't see how the Israeli police treated the Palestinian worshippers, elders, women, children. They went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were beaten, they were injured. I saw the women, how the women were treated badly today, yesterday, the day before, and every day in Sheikh Jarrah. They are trying to force displace the Palestinians. And I can say that Hamas is a result. Let's go to the roots of the conflict. Let's go to the roots of the problem.
But my question was,
the main problem.
My question was, would you say to Hamas to stop firing those rockets into southern Israel?
For sure, we want to end the occupation, and I really don't like any kind of violence. But let me say and be clear, I am as a Palestinian in Hebron. I was attacked in the last week by the settlers, by the soldiers, and all this kind of violence should be stopped. But first, we should stop the occupation, stop the settler violence, and make Israel accountable for its occupation and for its apartheid. If we want to end all violence, we should work hard to end the occupation and make Israel accountable for its apartheid and oppression against the Palestinians. That is the main cause of violence, not Hamas, not.
So there it is. There it is for you folks. He's making it very clear. He's been asked, and this was, you saw this third and fourth time he was asked the same question over and over again. Will you tell Hamas to stop firing rockets? It's a very simple thing to ask for. Stop committing acts of terror. That's all. And as you heard from the BBC, something you will not see on the United States news, the simple question being asked over and over again. Will you stop terrorism? And the answer over and over again was no. That it's justified. That terrorism was justified. And that is not the right answer. That is not true. Terrorism is never justified. And if you think terrorism is justified, please, I would love to hear when it is, because I don't believe it is. Terrorism is never justified. It is never good for the people that they're claiming to do this for. And Hamas is claiming to do this for the Palestinian people. They're doing it for power. They're doing it for their own power. And they're terrorizing a group of people so that they can gain, that Hamas can gain more power. And we have seen throughout history, whenever we see these terrorist organizations, when they do gain more power, the people are never better off. They have never have improved lives, because those very same terrorist individuals turn into authoritarians, because they are authoritarians at heart. They are dictators at heart. They do not believe in freedom. They're not there for freedom. They're there for power. And we see that same thing in large degree in BLM, in Antifa, and what we see in their actions. That they are more than willing to use terrorist actions, as we saw, and as I showed you earlier from Andy Nago, from May 15th at 7:16 p.m., as Antifa is going out over and over again, attacking police, trying to destabilize our neighborhoods, trying to use the same tactics that Hamas is using in terms of terror to try and get power for themselves. That doesn't help anyone. And we need to speak about that as we watch that Joe Biden is going out and saying, you only have the choices that the government gives you, which is a lie. I tell you. And yes, I am ignoring Shauna. So, and I hate to have to do that to anyone. I hate to ignore them. But this show is about more than the rantings of one person, just because they think they're right. Because no one individual is perfect, and no one individual has the perfect answer. And it's understanding and having a conversation, an actual calm and reasonable conversation about this. But there are certain things that are absolute, and it's absolute that terrorism is wrong. I don't care who it comes from. Terrorism is wrong. And if you believe in terrorism, there's a problem. And by the way, for those who are wondering, this is from the Jerusalem Post. that Israel, and when I mentioned that the Israeli government has spoken to the Biden administration, that they showed them the smoking gun, proving Hamas worked out of that building. I understand that the United States, found the explanation satisfactory. So, no, I'm not just making that up. Again, we're trying to give you evidence and proof and documentation, things that are not being said in the United States, so that you can make the best decision for yourself, whatever that may be. Although we would always hope that that is not going to be resulting in terrorism or any of the negative aspects. And by the way, when there was one other thing I wanted to show you guys, talking about the Hamas metro was struck by 450 missiles in 40 minutes, and it destroyed many of the Hamas activists, the Hamas terrorists who had dug into positions. Again, that's an attempt by the Israeli government, as we can see, as the facts show us, of them trying to limit the individuals who are the innocent individuals who are being affected by this. But I tend to believe that while our world is changing, and it is changing, that we have to be very careful and make sure that we are changing both in strength and towards a positive outcome. And I don't believe we see that with Joe Biden. That we have seen Joe Biden acting out of weakness, reacting, and acting on policy that has been proven to be incorrect over time. Funding Iran has led to greater terrorism in the world. Funding Hamas, as Joe Biden has done indirectly, has created more terror in the world. The Middle East is even more unstable than it normally is because Joe Biden has been weak. The reason why we see more problems with the Ukraine is because Joe Biden has been weak. The reason why we continue to see the genocide of the Uyghurs in China is because Joe Biden has been weak. The reason why we see autonomous zones in the United States at this moment holding American citizens hostage is because, in part, Joe Biden is weak. And this is a problem. And we need to address that problem. Because the world is changing. And it's getting harder and harder to be able to speak freely. And it's going to get a lot harder very soon, when we're going to have to be paying to allow our free speech to be heard. Because it's not going to stop at Twitter. It's going to be all of the social media. And that means it's going to be harder to be heard, to be able to speak. Even more important, why we need to have more people, and we ask for more subscribers, more people subscribed to share their views, their thoughts, their understanding, and not to rant on racist ideology, but to actually have a conversation about the issues that matter. Not to create straw men, but to deal with the issues as we see them, as we can verify them and show them. Because that's important. That's what our news media was supposed to be there for. And they've abandoned that. Well, now it's on us as citizens. And we have to do it. So we've been on for a little over 2.5 hours, folks. And I want to thank Mavis, Hot Chicks, Jason, Mike, all the people who've called in, the people who've watched the program. I hope everyone who has watched this, even if this is your first time, that you were able to find out something new and to find information that gives you a broader understanding of the issues and how they are affecting us all. I hope you like it, and please do like and share. Most of all, please do subscribe. Help us to get to 1,000 subscribers. Help us to get to use the algorithms of the social media to reach more people and to discuss these issues every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so that we can create a better world, and that as the world changes, it changes for the better, not changing for an exclusive elite group of individuals who only want more power over you every day. So, folks, you'll see the descriptions in the comments. I look forward to speaking to you again during the week to keep you up to date about what's going on with the school board and our battle with the Commissioner of New York for the safety and lives of our children in schools, as well as many other stories. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be back here talking with you about the issues that matter to you. Thank you.